Final JPAC meeting of the year.
So
you got happy about that, right?
I mean, we get to pass it on. Yes, so somebody else gets the. Okay, well, welcome. My name is Ben Hewitt. I'm the Deputy Director for Planning Investment for UDOT. Carlos is doing multiple different trips right now, so I'm going to step in for him for this meeting. But I just want to welcome everyone. So I think we'll start with introductions. I bet you're right when she's Jewish.
Myron Lee with the CMPO.
Ted Olson, Deputy Director, WFRC.
Community Davenport, MPO Director of the Senate.
Mark Shedder, Clearfield City Mayor.
I'm Andrew River, Executive Director at WFRC.
Don Ramsey, Mayor of South Jordan City. Chair.
Sean Elliott, MPO Director. Third person there, of Jordan, when the website is looking forward to the overpasses on the Mountain View corridor.
Andy Cruz, River City Council.
Allison Strauss, Sandy City Council.
Ivan Herrera for the Ohio Eastern.
Jeff Baker from the UK. Russ Morris. Planning Director with the UK.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, you want to use that one?
Yeah, okay, there you go.
Peter Asplund with UDOT Policy Legislative Affairs.
Richard Andel, Federal Highway Administration.
Josh Bagger, Director of Trails and Transit.
John Ainer, Communications Manager with WFRC. Miranda Jones Cox, Government Affairs with WFRC.
Joy Johnner, Long Range Planning Group, WFRC.
And Barron, Communications Manager for Planning and Development at UDOT. Andrea Olson, UDOT Planning.
All right, and we have some people online. I don't know the best way to do it. Maybe just let's try it. If you're online, just introduce yourself. Somebody volunteer to go first.
Kathleen Alder, Mayor of Providence, Chair of the CMPO.
Julie Fulmer, Mayor of Vineyard City.
Yeah, Salvastrani, Mayor of Mill Creek, representing the Utah Air Quality Board.
Kate Becker, Morgan County Administrative Manager.
Jeff Gilbert, Cash MPO.
Todd Butler, Connect Transit and Cash MPO.
All right, did we get everybody online?
No, Amelia Powers Gardner, Utah County Commissioner.
All right, thank you.
I see Helen Peter from Salt County is on as well.
Okay.
Yes, I am. I'm here.
Okay, welcome once again, everyone. First order of business then is, hope everybody got a chance to look at the minutes from last meeting. And so if everyone did, at least somebody, if you want to make a motion to approve. Oh,
There we, yeah.
yeah, maybe one more introduction here.
Sorry, Colin Merrill, City of UDOT.
Move to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Motion in a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, minutes are approved. Okay, we've got a few different topics on the agenda today. First one, I'll just run through real quick and then we'll circle back on. The first one is a continuation of the aspirational transportation discussion from last meeting. And there have been other discussions in the Utah's Unified Transportation Plan meetings. So we wanted to take some time and continue that discussion today. Then we'll talk a little bit about transportation reauthorization on the federal side. And then we've got a couple of updates. Front Josh Ventura from UDOT is going to talk about that and in coordination with the Front project in coordination with UTA. And then Meg will talk about the grid study. And then if we have time, we can talk about any other topics anybody wants to. So with that, I wasn't here last meeting, so I'm going to need all of your help to set the stage a little bit for the continuation of the discussion. But I know that in some of the lead ups, the discussion was around looking at, we're Utah growing. We all know, we all have different issues related to growth. And with that, we want to be able to think big, think aspirational when it comes to our transportation planning. As always, in our roles, we need to balance that with being pragmatic, working, within our processes to make sure that we're being responsible and stewards of the different funding and things like that we deal with. So we want to be able to do both of those things is create room for thinking big and aspirational, and then also being pragmatic and working within our processes. So I believe that's where the discussion was started. So I was thinking that maybe we do a quick, with all of your help, quick recap of where we were, any discussions that have happened since then, and then we can look forward, some next steps. So with that, is there anybody willing to jump in and help a little bit on the recap of what we talked about last time to start this continuation?
And who's going to step? Well, I'm happy to. Ben, it's almost like we didn't plan this. Before we do that, and now I'm just back to planning this. Did you want to share anything first, just about today's news with the governor's budget?
Yeah. That's probably a good backdrop for these types of discussions. So the governor announced the new budget this morning, and I came from that press conference. And so it's available now on gopb.utah.gov. He talked about the different categories, people, places, and prosperity in that budget. Some of the highlights that he was talking about earlier today were, around some energy, the housing, a lot of the quality of life stuff that we all have been talking about. There wasn't a lot of very, not a lot of specific stuff related to transportation like there was in previous years, but I think the general message was to continue that investment and effort that we've been working on for the past few years when it comes to transportation. So I'm sure that once everybody gets a chance to dig in there and review that budget, there's going to be more of that. But yeah, that was just announced today, so it's news. Yeah, and speaking of the previous years, there's been a few years of big transportation investments. We have a lot planned. We've got a big program built. I think our goal with, I know within UDOT is to make progress on and implement the stuff that we've built this program out. So that is multimodal when it comes to highway. We've got a lot of transportation and first mile, last mile projects that are out and funded, and we're going to be working towards making progress on those. Yeah, thank you for the reminder on that.
Ben, thank you very much. And I mean, to that point, it really is worth just reflecting in terms of the state budget. the remarkable level of investment that's going into transportation, into multimodal transportation. And as Ben said, just to echo, even though aren't new big initiatives in that the governor's proposal for transportation, it reflects this continuation of what is really right now the biggest program in terms of the size and number of projects and volume of dollars that has ever happened in Utah's history. And it is state roads, it is transit, and it is active transportation. And so, you know, if you hear about transportation, which you all do, otherwise you wouldn't be in this room, this is a really, really good thing. And so it's just a continuation of the work that's been happening as reflected in the governor's budget. So that's really terrific. Okay. Those of you that were here last time, you may remember that we had a conversation, and this conversation has been happening in a bunch of different spaces. We talked about it at some WFRC meetings. Certainly all the staff from the transportation agencies have been thinking and working on this a lot. But this is a conversation we always have, but it's about what should we be doing for the future of Utah's transportation system. And obviously that's not just about transportation, but it's about mobility and air quality and economic opportunity and access to opportunities for jobs and school and recreation. In other words, it's about quality of life, right? How do we have a kind of transportation system that enables Utah to continue to thrive? As always happens, but maybe even perhaps it seems like more now than even ever, there is a strong desire to make sure that we're thinking big and bold and aspirationally about the future of Utah's transportation systems. And I won't do this now, but I could go around the room and online and we did some of this in the last meeting and ask those of you, particularly that are elected officials of your communities, do you have things you'd like to accomplish in your community or around your area of transportation? And all of you have big lists for things that you would love to see happen. Last time we were here, I remember we had a whole bunch of conversation about east-west mobility and transit. That's just one example of something that we talked about in this meeting last time. And so the question that we have been deliberating over in the last meeting and since the last JPAC meeting is what is the right way to explore aspirational concepts for multiple transportation choices for state and local roads, for transit and for active transportation, right? Projects and strategies for transportation, and appropriately balance them with a pragmatic consideration of the context and the costs. And in some ways, this is what transportation planning is all about. We would not be doing our job if we simply said, what is the plan? Great, what are the plans you've done? Right? Because that doesn't actually translate to a feasible path forward for getting it done. It's not anything about prioritization. And also that would be ignoring the very real the imperative to be prudent with the use of limited taxpayer dollars. Because the reality is most of the investment that happens in transportation comes from tax dollars, from the public sector revenues that are generated. So we have to be really careful. And so it's trying to strike that balance. And in that sort of overall context, what we have been doing and the feedback that you all gave us on the transportation staffs is that you want us to be identifying, make sure that we have a process to identify concepts for that you might consider to be aspirational for the future. Even if those concepts are things that for one reason or another, due to cost or feasibility or not enough study has happened, don't necessarily make it into the official transportation plans. In a way, we've always done this. We've identified concepts to consider through our regular planning processes and through stakeholder input. You know, many of you have actually participated in these workshops that we have around the region where we explore concepts that could be considered going forward. But what we want to do also is make sure that we are identifying concepts that are additional to what goes in the official plan, identifying them and displaying them, even if it may not be feasible for them to be included in the official constrained transportation plans, right? Because again, the official plans that we adopt through our processes have constraints, as they should. Constraints based on the availability of resources, constraints based on feasibility, constraints based on public and stakeholder support. But some way to make sure that we're identifying those concepts that perhaps warrant further review and consideration as time goes on. And so you may remember we have talked about all of this in our previous meeting. We, the transportation agency staffs, have been working on this a lot since then. Of how do we do this? What enhancements make sense to our process? And I think I can share my screen. Let me see if I'm going to put on the screen, if I am successful, working in Google Meet. Who actually uses Google Meet? Shepard is like looking over my shoulder, being like, "Nope, that's not how you."
I got no idea. It's
If
Google.
you want, I can try if you want to show that document.
Yeah, sure, that'd be great.
Let me
I
try.
see it and I can't share it because I don't know how to use Google Meet. So, what I just wanted to display to you, and we're happy to share this out after this meeting for feedback, is a sort of a flow that we've been working on to make sure, yep, there it is. See, perfect, you can see it so clearly. Basically, the notion of this flow here is that, and maybe, can you zoom in, maybe? At the top, what it indicates is concepts for consideration that, and if you just go to the flow chart, Ben, at the top, you would see you get concepts that would come in for consideration from any sources. They're in the existing plans. There are studies that are underway to consider additional concepts, engagement from stakeholders, be it cities, counties, community organizations, that we want concepts to be considered. And there would be sort of essentially some sort of a preliminary screening of those concepts where we ask questions, whether concepts that are offered up, do they advance shared goals for community and economic development or network connectivity? Do they have some meaningful community support? Has any meaningful planning or analysis gone into them? Is there reasonable technical viability? Is there a reasonable system or cost benefit? And we would sort of assess that. And just to, I want to put a sort of a finer point to help people understand what we're talking about here. Imagine there was a concept that came forward that somebody just said, you know what I think we should do? I think that we should bury I-15, put I-15 underground for the entire length of the state of Utah.
Great idea.
Okay, so there's one vote of support for that. The chances are that on those sort of those list of sort of preliminary flexible and qualitative considerations, the feasibility of that is just technical feasibility and cost feasibility is just really, really low. And the reality is, in terms of cost benefit, you don't have to do detailed technical analysis, right? To know, like, that's just not a reasonable thing to seriously consider. So then that probably just doesn't move forward. But other concepts that are brought forward, where there has been a significant degree of thought and analysis and community engagement, and for this one, I'll give you a different example that those of you in Southwest Salt Lake County will appreciate. There's been a lot of talk over time about the possibility of connecting tracks from Daybreak in South Jordan over to Point of the Mountain. But it is not, that project is not right now in our transportation plans, okay? And there's a reason it's not up until this point, is because it's gone through technical evaluation. And up until this point, it has not satisfied the criteria of the land use, the cost. There are other less expensive solutions to connect via neighborhood bus service. And so that high dollar, really significant capital project has not ended up in the plans yet. And then Mayor Ramsey, I'll use you as an example.
I'm just smiling and.
Mayor Ramsey might say, or Councilmember Parucci, I mean, any of you, you might say, well, wait a second. I looked at your plan and that's not there at all. Why don't you guys have any vision? Why haven't you considered this idea?
You're crediting me to say no.
No, not you, you would never say something. You were gentle.
Right.
But you might fairly say, why isn't that there? Why isn't that considered? And the answer, of course, from, the transportation agencies, UTA, all of us, we would say, we've looked at a lot. Of course, we've considered it. And we might also say, we would love for that to happen. We would all love for that to happen, but it's not in the plan now because valid reasons, let's say. And we think it's really important that there be a way for a project like that. I'm not actually meaning that one as we go forward, but a project.
I think that's the one you mean.
Yeah, okay. For a project like that, for us to identify and display and demonstrate, of course, we've looked at it. And in fact, we all think that would be terrific. And it's not just nowhere. So we have to have a way for projects like that to be identified and displayed, and then provide a little bit of information as to why isn't it in the official plan now, and what needs to happen. What would need to happen in terms of land use or resources or whatever for that to move forward. Okay, so we realize that that's something that we're missing now, I think, in our transportation plans. And for that matter, we should be able to demonstrate that there sometimes are steps to get to an eventual goal, right? What's the objective? We want to have more east-west connectivity in that area. And maybe first there's bus service, and then maybe there's BRT, and then there's rail, and a progression. That's not necessarily the right way to do it, but we can acknowledge what are the problems we're trying to solve, right? What are the needs we're trying to meet? And rather than just saying yes, no to a project, how can we move in the direction that addresses those needs? Now, before I leave any misconceptions, we are right now in the process of reevaluating. Everybody knows this, the regional transportation plans and the unified transportation plan. And in Southwest Salt Lake County and Northwest Utah County, we're doing the Transit Fresh Look. And it's entirely possible that that project that I was just talking about does make it into the next regional transportation plan and unified plan. Lest anybody think I'm prejudging the outcomes of that Transit Fresh Look. Okay? Okay. So you get the basic point here, right? Is that we want to recognize that there may be projects or concepts to achieve really important needs. And I'm not just talking about the Wasatch Front, Mayor Gale. This can be for Morgan County, right? This could be for anywhere in the state that may not make it into the plan because of the appropriate balance that we have to strike with pragmatism and technical evaluative criteria. But we also want to recognize that these are things that have some engagement and support from the community and some viability, and we shouldn't just have them disappear. So it's about striking that balance. So the flow chart, we're again happy to send this out to folks on JPAC, is intended to sort of provide a framework for the transportation agencies to do this consideration and have transparency and information made available to you all and to members of the public, so that people don't think that we just go behind a curtain, make decisions, and then the project disappears. Where are those projects, and how do we know that they're still on the radar and being considered? Okay, I'll pause there and see if any of my transportation planning partners want to correct or supplement anything that I've said about that. And we'll also welcome any discussion, Ben, if that's okay.
Yeah, a couple of things that I was just thinking of when you were talking about that is, the steps thing. And I think that that's one thing that I've noticed with sometimes the way that the plans are viewed is, I'll take, Josh in a little bit is going to talk about front runner. And so, he'll talk about the front runner, the strategic double tracking, the front runner 2X project, and it's some strategic segments along the front runner project. And I think sometimes it's hard for some people to see that it's like, okay, there's, UTA has done this whole look at for the future of front runner all the way down, to where it's contemplating like some express service on there with some, which requires some quad tracking and stuff like that. So I think sometimes maybe there's not a space, you know, when it ends up in the plan, you see the current project and the segments, but you don't see the big picture that this is a piece of. It's totally compatible with, and it's a working our way towards that. I know we do that with roads, you know, on different highways where you'll see some passing lane projects along a corridor, but that we probably have a corridor plan for that whole corridor that if we showed that and then we showed like, oh, that this immediate project fits into this long-term thing. We're doing that right now with the Utah Trail Network, where, you know, we've programmed some projects, and if you look at just those on a map, you can't really see that this is part of this larger network plan that, you know, and that's what the team is working on right now. So I just keyed it on that point. I think that it's being able to see that, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, like end state full build or, you know, network, or, you know, there's a lot of examples of that. So anyway, hopefully that gave time for other people to think about other things.
And we're also, for those of you that are online for this topic or any other, we're watching you. And welcome you speaking up, raising your hand at any point here, right?
Sure. Did I get that right? That we're not going to bury?
I don't want to rule anything out prematurely, but I think that would face some challenges.
Very good.
But housing above it helps resolve the housing.
That's right.
I did want to point out, because I appreciate that. I appreciate the process of collaboration and the merging of aspirations and technicalities. But there's another factor that we have to also consider in this conversation. It's the political decision-making process. Because policymakers oftentimes do what they want to do, regardless of the technical feedback and the aspirational discussions and the regional plans. And so, I mean, that's another element of this whole process. It's very much reality.
Yeah, Councilmember, thank you for noting that. And we are always, I think, trying to balance technical considerations and people sometimes say politics, small p politics, and they mean it as like a derogatory, you know, it's a corrupting of the process. I don't view it. I think we shouldn't view politics in that way. Politics viewed in this sense is the engagement by elected representatives of communities to express what's most important to our community. And so there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's a necessary part of the process. I think that we have, and we really try hard over the years to strike that right balance so that anybody can raise an idea, but there should be a balancing of the concept being raised and then an actual analysis and vetting about, is a concept going to best serve the needs of the community? And so that we try as hard as we can to make sure that the plans that we have, you know, are the best solutions so that we can provide options for policymakers. And you know what, if additional funding is provided for a project, well, if it's in the plan, then that means it's a good, valid project. And if there's a strong desire for whatever reason to accelerate something with funding, then that's the prerogative of policymakers to do that. Yeah.
This is Julie Fulmer. I like this idea too because I think it helps us narrow in on our scope. Sometimes when we are building out these models or kind of deciphering why something's important, we don't always use the metrics that say, and Dawn, sorry to go back to you, but that maybe if that route was being looked at, Dawn might say, hey, but you're not looking at this data that we have. And then we can update our models to start incorporating that in Mayor Ramsey's, you know, review of that road so that we can update and start creating the best outlook for the future that maybe we don't necessarily have presently.
You know, part of the challenge, and I think we all welcome the opportunity, is that we keep the options open. That as we plan forward, that decisions we make today do not preclude the opportunities of this visionary site, because one of the issues that I speak to and try to is, as you've got a president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House and front runners, the main piece of what their vision is, and one of the challenges in order to accomplish that is we need to limit the at-grade crossings. If you're going to increase that speed, so that's a concept that needs to stay in the back of our minds as we build new roads and more overpasses. We stop those conflicts because that allows us that opportunity going forward. So anyway, that's just some insight.
Jeff, I really like that example. Because that I think is a good example of something like let's just say eliminating all at-grade crossings for the entire length of front runner. That would be fantastic. Technically really challenging and really expensive.
The orange would be wearing right now if we did that.
So that may be a great example of a concept which may not be in the official transportation plan, which has limits based on feasibility and costs, et cetera. But it shouldn't just be nowhere, right? It should be identified as something that we have. If we could do it, it would be wonderful to accomplish that. And so let's depict that and then provide the opportunity for people, us and others, to think about what would we need to get there. So
we look for opportunities to decrease that structure that holds us back.
Yeah, I like that. I like that sometimes it's not always a specific project. It's like a principle of, minimizing, limiting, eliminating at-grade rail crossings within our system. That type of thing has room in this discussion for sure.
I just want to say one more thing. I think only one more thing. Tiffany made a point in meetings earlier, which I think is worth noting to you all here, which is it's not always about a specific project. We shouldn't think about our meeting transportation needs or meeting the mobility needs in our region and our communities with necessarily a specific project. Anybody can come up with an idea for a project, and we shouldn't have an approach where we just say yes, no, and then stop the conversation there, right? Because then that leaves people frustrated. More important, Tiffany, I'm channeling you and you can correct me or say it yourself. Should I just stop talking and let you say this, the rest of this?
No, you've already called me out. So.
Like what we should try to do, and what we do try to do as transportation planning agencies, is identify what is the need that we're trying to meet. Whatever, east-west mobility, better access to, whatever the case may be. And there may be a whole variety of ways to address that need. That is not necessarily the specific project offered up first. It may be that, but we should be open to considering other approaches that maybe accomplish the need even more effectively or less expensive. So making sure that it's not just projects, yes, no, but it's about what are the goals and the needs that we're trying to meet and how can we work together to accomplish those. And our processes should be flexible enough to do. Did I do a decent job of capturing your point? Okay.
I mean, to that same point, sometimes as a municipality or as a local area, we look at how it affects us. We need to understand that and make sure that we address that, but we also need to tie it into the bigger picture, which I think is critical, because one day in Linden, I may want to go to Ogden. What are the options for me to get to Ogden? I'm not just living in Linden. I do go throughout the state. And so as we look at things, let's look at it from a local perspective, but also from a regional perspective, and always balance that. Because what I do in my city is going to affect you in the adjacent city. And we need to have those discussions, which is why we're here to do that, but do it in a very creative and positive way to where my impact doesn't affect you in a negative way. That the planning goes forward in such a way that it's in sync with what I'm trying to do.
I love that. That will actually lead me to my concluding comment on this, which is the way we do this work is unified, right? There is a reason we have Utah's unified transportation plan, that it's not just UTA doing their thing, and UDOT doing their thing, and the cities and the counties or the MPOs. We work together and thinking broadly about the future and aspirationally about the future and balancing that with pragmatic consideration of the context and the costs and all, but doing that together for Utah's future is the embodiment of what JPAC is all about and what the Utah's Unified Transportation Plan is all about. So thank you.
I do have a question.
Yes.
So, as far as you know, I like the idea of obviously collaboratively working together and whatnot. I guess what I've seen is sometimes data sets where we're getting them and which data sets we're going off of, and it doesn't seem like there is consensus. You know, we might get one set of data saying, you know, this is your projected growth, but the cities know, hey, we've already allowed, you know, these lots are allotted. We've got there's 12,000 units coming on, and you're not showing those numbers. Is there a process that allows, obviously it needs to be collaborative, but I do realize in some things, in some of the projects, I know the federal government has certain requirements and what you have to go off of, but it does seem like there's a disparity between which data sets we're going off of, what the cities are going off of, what the MPO is going off of, what UDOT is and what UTA is. And I'm wondering, how do we come more in line so that we're seeing the same numbers?
Can I ask the question? That I love that. I'm not a planner in the sense that official planners, but I understood that as planners, you look from a city's perspective what their build out would be based on their current zoning. So you should know what those numbers potentially are going to be, and the rate at which that's going to happen could happen more quickly in the case of Northwest Utah County and Southwest Salt Lake County. But ultimately, based on zoning and density, whatever you plan, and that could change, but you should have a perspective of what that potentially is going to be and what that impact's going to be. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're not even going off the zoning. They're going off of entitled lots. So, you know, by any means, at any given time, those developers can act on that and start building, right? As far as the timeline, I don't think cities really have control over, you know, I don't believe we have the right to tell developers when they need to start their developments, but they have come in and, you know, they do have entitled lots. This obviously is not Alpine because we're mostly built out.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm hearing from our end of the state.
Yeah. Others may want to comment on this. This is a really, it may seem like a technical issue, but it's a really important issue, making sure that we have the best data and consistent data, particularly about where growth and development is likely to occur. And
but is there a process though? I mean, I think
there
is process on which data sets and.
Yeah, and there's actually a lot of really good process about what data is utilized. And I think that, candidly, I think that in the transportation space, we do perhaps a better job of aggregating data and then looking at what the potential development is. And the transportation agencies don't do that without the communities. We work with the communities and you tell us, here's what we anticipate the development is going to be. There actually is I've heard that some people have thought that we're tied to, well, you have to, like by federal law, you have to use the census data from 2020, even though that data is, you know, rapidly gets out of date. And I just want to assure you that's not actually the case in transportation planning. There are some areas in state law that is the case, not in transportation planning. The way that we do it, and we work with the Gardner Policy Institute on this as well, is that is one of the inputs, but we are updating that data for the development that is occurring, the zoning that is enabling development to occur, and then also projecting beyond today into the future. So it's a really dynamic data that we're using. So it may be perhaps better than you may fear, but it is not perfect because things are constantly changing in this environment. But we're always trying and working with all the communities to get the most recent information about what development is occurring and what development is authorized to occur.
This is Julie Fulmer. Maybe I didn't articulate it earlier, but I feel like the additional ability to have these studies before us for things that aren't necessarily in our plans, but have been reviewed, I think will allow us to compare those data sets between the scope that UTA uses or UDOT uses or a association of government uses and say, okay, it looks like this data was used here because every time we do a study, we have, we go through an RFP or we bring certain people to do that study and we can compare that data and make sure that it's streamlined, number one. And number two, if we do feel like we're missing something, because we're not always perfect, we have the ability to look back and fix it, which I really think is a benefit here.
Hey, if I can very briefly, I had a similar concern as what you're asking about a couple of years ago. Then evaluations came back that statistical flight transit was going to be much of an option for our area. And we said, based on that, and I said, what data are you looking at? Because I don't think that's the same data that I'm looking at. And it did allow us to have a conversation. Cities always know more. We know sooner than school districts know. We know sooner than everybody else knows what's coming in or what's being requested, what's being approved. And so along those lines, being able to share that information as often as possible to help all of the other planning organizations get up to speed with the fast bullet train speed of what's happening in our cities is helpful. But that's part of the impetus that helped bring about the Transit Fresh look that we're doing, to say we actually have updated information. It's coming on fast. It's happening fast. It's continued to happen faster. But what the models show has changed, and the intensity is going to be much greater. So we feel like we have more data to add to that, and it was something we'd like to explore, and it ended up justifying looking again.
Yeah, fantastic. You know, you look at like those elementary school projections that they show, you know, of a comet going or a spaceship going, you know, and unless you make those minor corrections as you go, you're going to miss an entire planet or a solar system. Do you know what I mean? If you're still going off your same data set, we have to be able to pivot and be able to do that.
You know what, I will jump in on this and note that I think we as MPOs, one important action that we, especially at MAG, I think could do more of is communicate the data that we are using and the process that we are using, and really work to build more trust around what that process looks like. And then share and make sure that everybody understands what that process looks like and we're all engaged in the process. So I accept this as a challenge, Mayor.
A lot of it too is I'm new to it, right? And our city hasn't had that history of being involved. So it's all new to me. So.
Yeah.
Well, and to that point, and to my earlier point, I think that's where you start getting the policy political process more aligned with the technical process. If there's more understanding and communication earlier on, that there's not going to be a divergence of opinions as often. There still will be, because that's a healthy process and it's supposed to be part of it, but there'll be more cohesion if there is transparency earlier on in the process. Yeah.
And we, as transportation agency employees, appreciate and rely on you as elected leaders who are engaged in this space to help us with that. You know, you're involved, you know more about what we do, and then you can communicate, help us communicate about that to your peers, and then share information back with us as you're doing right now. So very helpful.
Let me do a touch of technical input on this. Very, very light, I promise. When we get stuff from local government reaction to our growth forecast, I'll generalize, but two things tend to occur. One, we learn a ton about what we didn't understand, and we do get better by having that input. That is absolutely 100% the case. If we were to take the total amount of growth that each individual local government says, we're gonna get this in the next 20 years, we double what the Gardner Policy Institute would say we're gonna get. In other words, it tends to be the case that local governments are optimistic about how much growth actually will occur. And so we sort of have like this calibration process of like, okay, on the one hand, that if we add everything up, it goes way past how much we know is very likely to occur. So we have to have some way to square that. And so it's just a little bit of I want to share that so that there's this understanding of like, sometimes we can't just take that stuff carte blanche because, you know, history tells us that it's going to overshoot. We do.
I love it. I love the discussion. So I think we covered the recap and what has been going on. I just want to talk a little bit maybe about where we're headed. And I think what I heard is that we're having these conversations in concert with the discussions around Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. And so is that the spot, or I don't even know what to call it. Is that the place that we're going to create this space for these aspirational ideas and stuff like that within that?
Yes, and
yeah.
Because the nature of the Utah Unified Transportation Plan is that it is the combination essentially of all of the individual planning processes that happen in different agencies and in different areas. So, you know, in WFRC, you know, in our work, we're going to be talking about these concepts and that, you know, goes down to, well, what about Clearfield, or what about Morgan City, or what about Sandy, right? I mean, going down to the details, and that can and should be happening, you know, in our areas, just like in St. George, right? With the MPOs and with UDOT in the rural areas and with UTA, and then those feed up into the Unified Transportation Planning process. So I don't want to, I guess my point is, I don't think anybody should feel like, oh, well, you want to talk about what the needs are for the future? Well, you got to do it at a Unified Transportation Plan meeting or at a JPAC meeting. It's when we do our workshops around the region and we ask people, what do you need? And you put tape on the map. That's part of this process too. So there's sort of like no wrong door to engage here, but we just want to make sure we're capturing all of it and doing the good job again of balancing what the aspirations are with the pragmatic considerations as we go forward. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess, do we think that there's like a section of that end product where some of the aspirational principles, projects, and stuff like that are acknowledged within there? Is that some of the early ideas?
Yes, you're asking me a leading question. Did you know the answer? Yes, the idea would be that we would be identifying and displaying these additional, you know, concepts or projects or solutions as we go forward in some way, even if for the reasons we've already talked about, something doesn't end up in the plan, we would have a way to identify additional concepts so that there's the possibility to continue working on them, identify what would be needed to have those happen. So yes, that would be an enhancement to our work as we go forward, both process and then also communication. And like Mayor Fulmer's pointed, you know, earlier, it provides the opportunity for those concepts to get further review and for data to be identified. And so I feel like it's helpful to all of you in our communities if we're doing that. So rather than just being nowhere, there's somewhere, and we can keep working. If it makes sense, we can keep working on those things as we go forward. The best data and, you know, resources that may be available.
Can I make one comment related to aspiration? This conversation just made me think of this. I think it's probably something I'm just going to get, but it's something that a lot of us have already discussed with our organizations. But just in case anyone hasn't thought of this, as we prepare for the Olympics, which are now only 9 years away. 9 years, it's not 10, but we have 9 years on plan. As the Olympics prepare to come back, and I'm at the front of the line of people excited about that. I am here for it. there's a lot of aspirational ideas that are being discussed, right? We've got a lot of counties involved with hosting Olympic events, and it's critical that the whole state feel involved and be involved, and we give our residents an opportunity to be involved. There's a lot of conversation about that. But I think it's important that we just remember that some of the aspirational ideas that we come up with for the Olympics, leading up to the Olympics, big things that we want to do, they can't take the place, they shouldn't take the place of all of the good work and the process and the prioritization. We need to find a way to work in some of these aspirational things, but not at the expense of everything that communities all across the state of Utah have been working toward, planning toward, that all the MPOs have been working on. Just wanted to share that reminder that those aspirational ideas, we all get them. We're all getting them. We're all thinking the Olympics, ooh, we should, or we could, or wouldn't it be cool, or we need. There's a place for that, but it shouldn't supersede all of the work that everyone in this state has done toward the projects that are the important priorities for all the communities across the state. Anyway, just put that out there.
Does everybody feel good about that discussion? Ready to move on to the next? Well, thank you. All right, on our agenda, we had a federal topic related to transportation reauthorization. So there's some experts in the room here about some of this stuff. So I guess I'll kick off what the idea was with this discussion is this is related to our federal program, our federal funding, the current federal surface transportation authorization that we have right now, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, goes through September of 2026. So now is the time to start having the conversations about what the next one looks like. I think back, and it doesn't feel like it was that long ago when we were just doing the same thing about the FAST Act, and talking about what that should look like. And so I think some of the ideas were to talk about what different entities and agencies are where they're having discussions, and then how we can collaborate and come up with shared principles. Like, I'll give an example, like for UDOT, we have a lot of discussions with AASHTO, that's the association of all the DOTs in the country. And so those discussions happen at multiple meetings when we all get together and we try to hone in on, you can imagine not every state agrees on every little aspect of the federal program, but we try to hone in on the things that we can agree on and shared principles. And then we're able to provide that input to the policymakers and decision makers that work on that authorization. Each individual state then can have their own specific things that they want to also advance through their own channels or whatever, but that group comes together and has those discussions. I mean, we have multiple different committees, and they're writing white papers and editing them and trying to hone in on having discussions around that. So JPAC is a similar, I feel like that's a similar entity with our groups, that where we can start these discussions, and if we have common principles or shared principles, I guess I should share that we had a document in the previous one, and I'll share that real quick just as an example. If I get the right one.
Ben, as you're pulling that up, I'll note that part of the benefit of us working together on identifying shared principles is that it's actually extremely helpful, not just for us, but for the members of our congressional delegation, who, if we can identify with one voice with us, our shared principles, then that really helps them know what to go fight for. And we've heard this from our members of our delegation, year in, year out. So that's part of the objective here, is to help be, Team Utah in what we want out of the federal reauthorization.
So I'm just showing on the screen here, this is just an example of the last time around document that was created, for Utah, and talking about long-term reauthorization, sustainable funding mechanisms, enhanced flexibility in the formula programs. So those are the types of things that could come out of a group like this. And then, like I said, there could be additional specific to different agencies and entities, things that they want to push. I'll just give some background that at our level at AASHTO, there's discussions around trying to talk about the right balance between formula funding and discretionary programs, and then numbering type of specific federal programs or funding buckets versus less with more flexibility within those. So that's the type of thing that those discussions are happening. So anyway, I just wanted to kick that off. That one is maybe we could share like who's having discussions and with what groups, and then how do we bring that together for Utah. So
then can we several of you in this room know Ryan Levitt. You can introduce yourself, Ryan, but Ryan works for many of us, and we're very fortunate. Ryan is here from DC, and Ryan, can I put you on the spot to give us a little perspective and context about our delegation and what's going on in Washington and how that relates to looking ahead, does or doesn't impact what reauthorization looks like, please?
Happy to do it. So I'm Ryan Levitt. I'm a Washington, D.C. based federal consultant and lobbyist. I do represent several agencies in Utah, transportation centric. And I worked in the congressional delegation in Utah for about 10 years. And then I've been doing this consulting work for the last 5. Talking sort of 30,000 foot level on authorization, just maybe some of you could benefit from a little bit of background of what a big surface transportation reauthorization bill is. But every 5 years, typically, Congress will reauthorize all of our transportation programs through the U.S. Department of Transportation. So this is going to be all the programs through FHWA, through the through FTA, FRA, all of them, aviation, all of it. And Congress will sort of open up the hood every 5 years and say what's working, what's not working. And it's an excellent opportunity for them to make adjustments, to make programs work better. They also set the authorization funding levels for all these programs for the next 5 years. So it's a very important piece of legislation. And it's a great opportunity for folks like this group to figure out what are some adjustments that could be made to these programs to make them fit better for our needs. And we would want our congressional delegation to fight for those changes. As Andrew mentioned, it's helpful if we can all speak with one voice to our congressional delegation to say, these are Utah's priorities. And if you could all lock arms and go fight for them, that would be really helpful versus them hearing, 5 or 6 different stories from different groups, and then they get overwhelmed and say, what's the most important, what's not the most important. Looking at our delegation, we have a really good opportunity going into the next reauthorization. So right now, Congressman Owens serves on House T&I committee. That's the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. They have jurisdiction over the reauthorization bill in the House. Congresswoman Malloy currently serves on that committee. I'm not sure whether or not she will next Congress or not. I will see. And then I know with Blake Moore serving in House leadership, he's the vice chair of the conference, serves on the Ways and Means Committee. And we'll see where Dr. Mike Kennedy ends up. But ultimately, we have some great opportunities to work on this bill. On the Senate side, Senator Lee will be chairing the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the Senate. It's a pretty important thing. And then with Senator-elect Curtis coming in, he has expressed a desire to serve on the the Environment and Public Works Committee, EPW, which has a good chunk of the authorizations, jurisdiction. So we have some members who are at the table in the discussions about reauthorization. It's a great opportunity, particularly as Utah is not only looking to participate in shaping the reauthorization bill, but as we're preparing to host the next Olympics in 9 years. And so I think there is a great opportunity. And I don't know if you guys have any questions about, how an authorization bill comes together or whatnot, but I'd be happy to share my perspective. But ultimately, I know discussions are going to be ongoing. I think there's another meeting tomorrow where different agencies are going to be meeting together to share some of their high level priorities to try to whittle down what are a good collection of Utah priorities for the next reauthorization bill. And it sounds like, oh, well, we're a year and a half away. That should be plenty of time. Unfortunately, a lot of the work that gets done in the Congress happens in like the first few months, because that's when, as we get closer to the end of a Congress, we get into sort of into midterm elections, and I call it the silly season, and nothing really gets done. So really the heart of the work of an incoming Congress happens in the first 6 to 8 months. And so the committees are going to be asking for these types of ideas about what the next reauthorization bill is, because they're going to start writing it now. And so a lot of the AASHTO groups or NARC or APTA, those groups are all developing from their industry's perspectives, what should the reauthorization bill look like? And Utah should be doing the same. So I recommend you all for thinking ahead.
Ryan, your last point about the national groups is a really important point. And Utah is really well situated, not just because of the members of our delegation, but we are well represented with our national organizations. You mentioned APTA, the American Public Transportation Association. Beth Holbrook from UTA trustee is currently the chair of the APTA Legislative Committee, newly minted chair of the APTA Legislative Committee. Not able to be here because she's actually in DC. I think she's in DC.
Yes, she's hosting the Legislative Committee.
There you go.
Right now.
Bob Stevenson, Davis County Commissioner Bob Stevenson, is the co-chair of the Transportation Committee for the National Association of Regional Councils. And so we've been working on policies. UDOT is always very well represented and respected within AASHTO. So, Mayor Shepherd is on the board of the National League of Cities. You go down the list, and so we have the ability to influence the national discussion, not just via our members of Congress, but also through our national associations, which have a really big impact on the policies that come out.
I'd love to kick it off with an idea. We talk a lot about transit, especially in the Southwest Valley, and one of the things that we hear a lot about limitations when it comes to transit funding and where we can do transit projects is the federal rules around where the funding can go. And I know that that's basically an impossible lift maybe for this authorization, but I think we should start that conversation to look at changing that structure and allowing more flexibility when federal funding comes for transit projects to not be so limited in its scope of where it can go, because that would benefit all of us in this room. Open the door. And honestly, I think it would benefit most members of Congress's districts. So there actually may not be as hard of a conversation to have. It's just having that conversation in a coordinated way.
We've had initial conversations about it.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, I've been talking to Burgess Owens about it.
Congressional staff is aware of that desire that adding to the formula some metric for fast-growing areas, new growth, fast-growing areas, and infill fast-growing areas. We are unique out here in the West. Utah's not the only one. There's several areas of the West that are growing fast, and there is not currently a metric. I can't second that enough. So whatever method we decide is the best way to work with our congressional delegation to try to create additional opportunities for federal funding for areas such as ours, county.
And I think the important thing is it has to be equally weighted to the other methods, if not elevated in some instances, because if it's just one of the metrics but not equally weighted, then it will still fail.
Yeah, because right now, the way that the Federal Transit Administration, just to add a little detail to what you're saying, Councilmember, the way the Federal Transit Administration allocates funding through their major capital investment grant program is you have to have existing transit ridership in an area in order to qualify to get more investment. And so if you're a fast-growing area and you're trying to build with transit in mind, help shape development in that area, it's really hard to do because you can't demonstrate that you already have transit ridership. And so that works against your point, fast-growing areas. So there should be more flexibility.
And I would just say, I think the reauthorization bill is an excellent vehicle for that kind of a change. You know, when you do a standalone bill in the middle of an authorization, it's very difficult to get traction, but we know the vehicle is going to move. There is going to be an authorization bill. So if you're able to attach that kind of to it, the example I would bring is in the last authorization bill, Utah really locked arms to try to help make the court capacity program work better.
If it looks like they're trying to solve the problem and that we're not missing anything specifically.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, Mayor Silvestrini, not Jeff.
Yeah, Julie, no problem. My name is Jeff, but hey, it's showing us that you're actually muted. I don't know if you are or not, but the mute sign is on your screen, the screen that we're seeing from you.
Chat.
There we go.
Okay,
Is that better?
can you hear us now?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, should we repeat the entire meeting?
Please do.
Can we blame it on Ben?
Move to adjourn. Sorry, sorry about that.
All right, is there any other topics or any other discussion on the reauthorization? Anybody?
Ivan, do you want to, you don't have to, again, putting you on the spot with FHWA, do you want to comment on how you're sort of navigating this as you're moving forward?
I'm not sure from the federal side we'll have much to say because, you know, we're not out to lobby or anything for, so basically we're at the mercy of what the decision makers make and put into the opposition bills. So I don't know that I have much to provide for the discussion.
Could you mention August distribution?
August distribution. Oh, yeah, well, we'll, in case you don't know, so one thing federal highway does is every end of this fiscal year, we'll go ahead and gather all the funds that are in danger of lapsing and making available to state DOTs. For the last 2 years, that number has gone on immensely. And so, yeah, I would imagine like we did the last year, we'll know around January, let the states know how much money will be becoming available. I would imagine it'll be another big number. And start working on putting together a plan to get that money spent. So
We were hoping for a legislative fix this year.
yeah.
You know, we were hoping for a legislative fix this year for August redistribution. And at this point, it doesn't look like that's going to happen this year. And so we are expecting a very large August redistribution again So I would encourage you, if there are projects out there that maybe could be advanced, start looking at that.
I just know that there's a lot of talk in Washington DC and elsewhere right now about federal employees. And I just want to say that our friends, Ivan Brigitte and the team at FHWA and FTA have been great partners for us to help navigate the federal processes and capture federal funding. So we've got a great partnership in Utah to everybody's benefit. I'll just real quick then raise two other things that I think are relevant to everybody as we look ahead to reauthorization. One is ozone. You all know to varying degrees that the EPA standards for ozone concentrations are very challenging for us to meet in Utah, not because we have more emissions than other places, we don't, but because we have over 80% of the ozone in our environment comes from background sources. It blows in from California or China or just comes from naturally occurring sources. Did you know that conifers and pine trees produce ozone precursors? They do. And so this is a challenge for us, and I'm bringing it up here because if we can't demonstrate conformity with those standards, then we could have our ability to utilize transportation dollars, not just federal, even state and local transportation dollars could be compromised. And so this is a really important issue that we are going to need to keep working on, doing as much as we can to clean the air, because that's really important for human health, and also trying to make sure we have a rational approach on this issue, for us and then also our peers in the Intermountain West who face this similar issue. Mayor Silvestrini obviously is involved in this via the Air Quality Board, but this is something that we would want to work with EPA and perhaps with Congress on, about looking at potential modifications to the regulations and even the Clean Air Act. Mayor, did you want to say anything else about that, or?
No, we've made some appeals to the EPA with respect to other things that we have done as a state to reduce nitrogen, emissions, and things that we did to address PM 2.5. And we're hoping that we can get a break from them, but we don't know. And obviously, with an incoming administration, some things may change, or we may get a more sympathetic era with respect to some of this. But it is a huge problem. But I know from the governor on down, we're working on trying to think about how creatively we can solve the regulatory problem, which is really difficult to solve from trying to stop more man-caused or human-caused sources.
The last thing, Ben, just real quick, I'll mention also is that a lot of federal transportation funding, particularly formula funding, so this is not like discretionary grants where you apply for a particular project, funding that just flows to our state and our agencies by formula, is based on population data. And that population data is, back to your point earlier, Mayor, is based on very outdated. I mean, in some cases, Ryan, help me, like back to 2010, I think, right, Miranda, right? So yes, if you're like, wait, did you say that right? Yeah, formulas that are based on data, and think about how much we've grown since then. So formulas are always tricky because there's always winners and losers, and you could win on one formula and then lose on another formula that's unrelated. However, there is legislation that was introduced from Senator Cruz. Sorry?
Cruz and Kelly.
Senators Cruz in Texas and Kelly in Arizona, to at least require analysis of this issue. Seems like a low bar. Like, let's look at the funding formulas and what data is being used. And we think that would be a productive thing. Like, not necessarily get into a food fight about formulas, but let's at least get the issue on the table for Utah's, for Utah's benefit to consider this. Okay.
If there's not others, another thing, and honestly, I know the delegation's already paying attention to this, but the recent BC Circuit Court decision that upended NEPA, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, but they basically said that the White House Council on Environmental Quality does not have the authority to require to mandate NEPA policies amongst agencies, which has completely upended the NEPA process, which frankly needs updating and needs some amending. But there's a lot of unintended consequences of this decision. I know it's on the delegation's radar, but it has massive implications for transportation funding and transportation projects writ large. So finding some kind of a solution to that situation is gonna impact us and the entire country.
Yeah. Great point.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Ryan, for your input on that topic. So with that, let's move on to the updates. So Josh, you're up first. Front runner.
Of course, I go ahead and share screen and it says you can't share your screen.
Josh, turn the mic on.
Thank you. I'm going to try sharing my screen one more time. There we go.
Oh, ta-da.
Perfect. Well, thanks everybody. My name is Josh Fandura. I know many of you in here, but if we haven't met, pleasure's mine. It's nice to meet everybody. I was asked to provide a quick 5-minute update on the FrontRunner 2X project and the FrontRunner point improvements. It's difficult for me to get through this in 5 minutes, but I will absolutely do my best. So just to talk about the current system for a second, the current corridor is 83 miles long and has 16 different stations. And you may not know this, but pretty much 75% of it is single tracked. And so the remaining 25% or so are the only locations that trains, northbound trains can actually pass southbound trains, right? Many people actually think it's double track the entire way. It very much is not. So the point of this project is to take the service from 30 minutes in the peak hour to 15 minutes in the peak hour, and from 60 minutes off peak to 30 minutes in the peak. Because frequency really drives ridership, right? You don't have to think about missing your train. It's just much less stressful to take the train. And that's the same whether you're talking buses, trains, whatever, really everything. So again, the main goal here is to increase that service. And to do that, we need more places for trains to pass each other. And of course, just more trains. So that's what this project is trying to do. I don't want to hit on this. We've talked a lot about growth. But if you look at the Wasatch Front population growth between now and 2040, it's expected to grow by, or increase by 37%. But the forecasted FrontRunner riderships more than double that, right? And the gist is, we just can't keep adding lanes to I-15 to build our way out of this population growth. So in 2040, it's actually going to be faster to take FrontRunner into Salt Lake, whether you're coming from the north or the south, than it is to drive your car. And that's what's really driving that ridership numbers. So quick overview of the FrontRunner 2X project. This is 8 double tracking segments. There is one section of track realignment. We need to procure 10 new train sets and do a maintenance facility update or create an additional one. And that's still being worked on. We talked about, again, frequency drives ridership. Reliability is a really important component for transit too, because, you know, if you need to get there for your meeting at whatever time it is, right? You want to be on time. You don't want to say the train was late and show up 10 minutes late to a meeting. So timelines. Obviously, we're here in the last phase of, or last quarter of 2024. Well, I guess I say last quarter, depending on what calendar you use. So, but looking through these major milestones, I think what everybody cares about is the revenue in service date. And that is currently scheduled for mid-2030. So we have a couple additional years of design. We hope to have that done at the end of 2025, start construction in 2026, and then revenue and service in 2030 is the current schedule. Cost-wise, our current cost estimate is $1.5 billion to complete these 20 additional miles of double tracking. I might add that includes the costs for right-of-way, those 10 additional train sets, the design, construction, that's the whole kit and caboodle. It actually has 30% contingency on it now. So to date, we have committed state funds that were through one-time and ongoing, well, actually, no, these were all, that's not true. Between appropriations from our Utah legislature, both one-time and ongoing, that equal $445 million. And Andrew, I think you mentioned the CIG Capital Investment Grant Program earlier. We are in the core capacity grant program. We're currently in the project development stage, and we're hoping for an 80-20 match. That's probably pretty optimistic, but that is what we've notified FTA of at this point. So as of September 1st, we awarded a progressive design build contract. This is a pretty exciting date. It went to a joint venture called Frontrunner Ford Partners, which is Stacy Whitbeck, Ralph Wadsworth Construction, Horrocks, and a number of other consultant teams. A good mix of national companies and local knowledge, local-based companies. And so they are responsible for, they brought on the designer, Horrocks and DEA and others. And then Stacy Whitbeck and RLW will be doing the majority of the capital work. So pretty exciting. We're off to the races. We feel like having the contractor and designer on board, we're really pushing the project forward. So that was a good day. I don't want to spend too much time on the core capacity process. Again, we are in project development stage at this point. We just recently asked for a one-year extension for that. And the reason is when you enter engineering, you lock in your commitment or the federal commitment. So, you know, say on a round number, $1 billion, we want to do 20%. FTA says, okay, we'll give you $800 million. Well, if the project goes up beyond that, the state will be responsible for any additional money. So cost certainty is a really big component here in making sure that we have the right number. The other project I want to talk about really quickly is called Frontrunner Point Improvements. So this is the new station at the Point of the Mountain development, the old prison site. And to get this 15-minute service that we talked about in the peak hour and be able to serve that 17th station, we actually need 3 more additional double tracking segments. And again, this has a little bit different purpose, right? The last one was that frequency purpose. Here, we're talking about, again, always trying to improve reliability, but enhance connectivity, support economic development in this area, obviously, and again, maintain that 15-minute frequency. The cost estimate on this is approximately $400 million, and that has actually been funded through a one-time and the commuter rail sub-account. So this one's actually funded, completely state funded, and we are just starting the NEPA work on it now. 8 minutes. That's pretty good. Perfect. Any questions?
Probably won't be the last further update that
I got till 2030.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. All right. Our other update is grid study. So I think Tiffany's going to share a presentation that Mag's going to go over.
Yeah. I'll kick off the presentation just with a reminder of what this is, and then turn the time over to Sean Elliott, the transportation manager with MAG. So what is the statewide regional roadway grid network study? Mouthful. It was funded by the state legislature in 2023 to essentially look at how can we create a well-connected grid network for the entire state. We're focusing on the 4 MPO areas, and our urban transit partners are part of this team as well as UDOT. So when you think of a well-connected grid network, what do you think of? What thing comes to mind?
Downtown Salt Lake City.
Downtown Salt Lake City is like the winning well-connected grid network. Unfortunately, not every area has that well of a grid network. And so what can we do to enhance that? The grid.
I can tell these guys over here, you're thinking of another spot. Or you have
Where are you thinking?
No, it was more of a snarky comment, and I hate driving in downtown Salt
Oh,
Lake.
okay.
So for some parts. Sorry.
That plat of Zion is like.
It'd be even worse if there wasn't a grid there.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, sure, I'll give it to you, yeah. So well-connected grid network, it's really important for effective road and transit and active transportation. So we hired a set of consultants, Fire & Peers and Horrocks, to work with the 4 MPOs, UDOT and the urban transit districts to help us better understand how do we create a well-connected grid network? What are the priority projects that can do that? This project also will look at jurisdictional ownership and what does that process look like, and what are some tips and tricks or help information that can help us better understand jurisdictional ownership is the second element of this project. So with that overview, I'm actually going to turn it over to Sean to let us all know where we are in this project. So I guess this is how you advance.
Thank you. All right. First off, let me go to the next slide here. So as you can see, there's the flat of Zion. It's a nice little picture of it back from today. A lot of our towns and our smaller towns and downtown Salt Lake City, they all had this typical grid setup, as we know. And then the other picture there looks like it's up in the Park City area, showing the freeway, and yet a lot of roads that go to nowhere and don't connect to much of anything. So I'm going to paint a different picture here just because I'm from Utah County, and we can talk about one of our areas there, the Lehigh area. It's a city now of just under 100,000 people. It's one of our fastest growing areas in the state. And when it comes to a connected grid system, and I'll back up, a connected grid system is not just arterials or freeways. It includes the collector system, the smaller roads that get people around. If you look at Lehigh going eastward toward American Fork, the only east-west corridors are SR 92, that's the highway up by the point of the mountain, and American Fork Main Street, which I can't tell you how far apart they are, but they're miles and miles apart, right? There are no other corridors at all, no collectors, no arterials. When they built SR 92 10 years ago now, when they redid it, they almost make it like a freeway, just be able to handle that extra traffic. Because of that, American Fork Main Street is a complete parking lot as it is right now. If you go westward through Lehigh, we have 2100 North, and UDOT is building a freeway down the middle of that soon, right? That's funded. Lehigh Main Street, 2-lane road, 4-lane in a few spots. And then Pioneer Crossing, which is again one of our hot spots for congestion. There are not other roadways through this area, the collectors and so forth, to move traffic. And so what happens is all of our trips, the local, the sub-regional, and the regional trips, all are focused on those 3 major corridors that we have now. Part of the grid study is to look at where are the gaps in the system, where haven't we made those connections. Salt Lake County did a pretty good job as it grew, and that grid expanded out. There are a few holes in places, and I'd say maybe some freeways that were left out in the larger scheme. Utah County, we grew nodal out from our cities, and there was a lot of not connecting. We didn't make those connections, and so that's part of what this process is. Whoops, I'm moving my screen. I need to move your screen. Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Some other people, I mean, why is a grid important?
So a grid is important again, because if we only have, like in Lehigh, where we only have 3 major corridors, every trip has to be focused onto those 3 corridors. If we had the smaller collectors that we're connecting, the smaller minor arterials and so forth, trips wouldn't have to go to those major corridors to make their sub-regional trips, and it frees up the regional corridors to do the work that they need. That's one reason it's important. Another is for transit connectivity, right? I think that's what you were looking for.
Congestion and transit, yeah.
Right. So for transit connectivity and even for actual transportation, the more we can, if we have smaller collectors that are connecting, those provide opportunities for both transit and for our active transportation that aren't as comfortable to be using Pioneer Crossing, for an example, to make their trips. And so this slide here gets into that, where it talks about the past studies we've done with the Utah Street Connectivity Guide, which was lost at the front, MPOs and UDOT and UTA. And then also Utah County already did a roadway grids study about 4 or 5 years ago. And so this study now builds upon it.
Sean, real quick, I think there was a hand, I think Trustee Christensen had a hand raised. Do you have a question or comment?
I do, sorry, I'm waiting for a plane at an airport, but I jokingly said they should have never forsaken the Plat of Zion, but as we've tried to implement local service, the lack of good arterial roads, which are actually ideal for transit, has been a real challenge, especially in some of the high growth communities, because those kind of minor to significant arterial roads don't exist. And to maneuver a 40-foot bus down that, something to the contrary just doesn't work as effectively. So having a better grid system helps in the long run.
Right, thank you. Yes, that is true. So on this chart, we're talking about mobility. We're talking about transportation choice. It allows for transit to work more efficiently. Emergency services, safety, and then the economy are all things that we're looking at in this study. Okay, so our partners in the study are the 4 Yukon MPOs, MAG, Wasatch Front, Cache, and Dixie. Suntran is the Dixie Transit Agency, and then Connect is the new name for Cache Valley Transit. They're part of the team on this, and then also UDOT and UTA. Key work that we're doing on the study, there's 2 phases to the study, as Lenise mentioned. There's the grid system portion, where we're going to define and communicate an ideal grid and the benefits of that for the 4 MPO areas. Come up with definitions and topologies and performance matrix. We're going to identify gaps and potential solutions. Now, I'll just point out one of the things this study looks at is we're looking at what are the ideal situations and what a potential grid could look at. But it does get turned back to the communities to go through their planning processes. And they might say, no, this doesn't work, right? There's just no way we're turning out that $500,000 home or whatever it is, right? But is there another solution then as you go through your planning process? And so, and then also we're going to prioritize those solutions and look at the multimodal benefits. Phase 2 is assess the highway jurisdictional ownership and refinements, suggest refinements in ownership criteria and the transfer process. Next slide. Sorry, I'm having to drag 2 votes here. Okay, so part of the grid study, the goals is to assess connectivity and grid function. Basically, this is looking at how our MPO regions, our urban regions, perform as a regional grid network for all of our modes. Look at our connectivity challenges now and in the future. And so what happens in the Dixie MPO or urban area versus Utah County is different. And so the study is broken up into 4 study teams. Each one of the urban areas has a different team so that they can look at their own local context and come up with solutions for their unique needs. let's see. And then the next step in it on the grid site is developing solutions, develop, test, and prioritize new and improved connections. We'll evaluate those connections, then refine them and come up with a prioritized ranked list, and then put emphasis on what are the high priority projects that we want to move forward from this study. And then the grid goals the implementation of those. Working with the localities to come up with a toolbox and a way that they can use this as part of their planning process to keep the conversation moving, but it's not just a study that sits on the shelf. Roadway ownership considerations, review jurisdictional transfers from the past, what has happened over the last decade in that, research other states and how they look at transfer of ownership, and then help UDOT, the MPOs and the localities think through potential ways to make this, to improve the process, to make it a little more transparent. So far on our stakeholder outreach, we've met with our technical committees, the different MPOs. They've met multiple times now. Utah League of Cities and Towns, they presented at their fall conference, the CAPS Summit conference, and then others to be determined. And really, that's what are we going to look for this next coming year to present as the study is ongoing. And then the last part, and I apologize, this is a little harder to see, but this is the timeline of the different processes. For the most part, the work that has been done to date is forming the committees and digging or going through and doing the research that's needed for the project. Next month in January is when they really get down to the putting lines on the map and showing where the gaps are and that kind of thing. So, and with that, are there any questions? Or that was easier than front runner. Alrighty, thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, thank you. All right, we're almost wrapped up here. I think I'll mention one thing and then I get to pass the torch over to the next.
Unless you want to keep going.
I think I'll pass the torch. So one thing I just wanted to mention, upcoming in our December Transportation Commission meeting, our Andrea Olson, planning director, she's going to go over with the commission some updates, catch up some of the amendments that have happened to the various plans and get those properly incorporated into the prioritization rank lists. And so she'll start that discussion in December, and then there'll be another discussion in February with that. So I just wanted to mention that. You know, since the last time that the rank list has been published, there has been some amendments and updates to the various plans that feed into that. So she'll be going over that. And with that, I'm going to turn time over to Lanice and Mag to talk about what next year looks like for this year. So.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Ben. So just as a reminder, JPAC, it's a partnership of all the transportation agencies, and therefore we alternate who hosts this group, who hosts the conversation and agenda setting and all the things. So thanks to UDOT for doing it this year. UTA did it last year, which means MAG gets to do it in 2025. We do have a tentative 2025 schedule just based on the quarterly meeting schedule that we all are used to. We have those dates set. I'm happy to share them now if you'd like to just mark them down. We'll also, of course, send out calendar invitations and all the things, but the next planned meeting is March 13th, 2025. So just mark that at, the same time, 11:30. Since MAG is hosting, we do plan to hold the meetings in person in Orem. We will also, of course, have a virtual option for those that can't make it to our location. But we're excited to host, and so we look forward to working with you on setting agenda items. So if you have the things, please share them with us, and looking forward to the meeting. So that's really all I have, unless there's questions for us. Okay, thank you.
All right, any other items that anybody wants to discuss before we wrap it up? All right, well, thank you all for the discussions today, and look forward to March.
With some of the things that we brought up today, like the aspirational document and the reauthorization principles from last time and the schedule, we can send those out as follow-up to this.
Yeah, we can get those sent out.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Is that like if they develop class? Like, oh, we got so much. We found this with the actors. All right, that was